Hi Bible Art Journalers. At our September meetup, I did a little tutorial on painting geodes or agate, which is a kind of rock, and they're very unassuming on the outside, sort of an oval or round shape with a dark gray, crusty, very plain exterior. But when you crack them open, they have different layers inside and sometimes sort of crystallized layers as well. And they're very colorful. They come in reds, pinks, purples, greens, blues. Pretty much any color you wanted to use, you could do, and it's going to look natural because the combinations are limitless. I'm actually going to do this today on just a piece of paper to show you again how I taught the tutorial at the class. I have one here in my Bible in Isaiah. The verse says, "I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places." And this just kind of was a picture to me of hidden treasure or a secret that's inside this very unassuming rock. Not too much longer after I had done this page, I came across another page where the scriptures talks about different kind of stones. I did another, just a little one here, and I didn't do this one quite as elaborately. You can see, once again, just like we do a lot of floral prints, any form of nature really points back to the Creator, and that's why I think we enjoy putting it in the Bible so much alongside words. And this verse is in Isaiah 54:10, and it says, "For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you." And it goes on to talk about, and it talks about being tossed by the storm and not comforted, and yet he says, "I will set your stones and lay your foundations and make your pinnacles and your gates." And he declares each of those things to be a precious stone. And he even mentions the agate in this verse. And so that was another really fun place to put it. And I actually just looked up the different kinds of stones. I sort of Google imaged and just saw the colors and the textures and sort of went with that on this page. I'm going to set this aside and we'll get started on our agate. Like I said, it can be a lot of different colors, so you might want to stay within a color family, mix up ahead of time different shades in similar colors in the blue purple family or the red orange family or different shades of green. And so I think I'm going to do a green one today just because I haven't done one in green. First of all, I have a couple different size brushes, but you can just use the smaller one if you want for the sake of speeding up. I'm going to use the larger one first and then drop my color in with the smaller one. They can be perfectly round. More often than not, they kind of have an irregular shape, and so that kind of adds some interest. So I've just got water on my brush, and I'm just going to do, this is actually going to be sort of the second layer in. So your stone will get just a tiny bit bigger than whatever this first shape, so just leave some room. And I know it's very hard to see because I'm painting with water, but you'll be able to see it once I drop in the color. So I'm just kind of making a fairly even ring of water in a irregular shape. What I told them at the tutorial was, so if you imagine this water ring that you put down is sort of like a 2-lane road going in a circle, you only want to lay your color down on the outer edge of the ring or the outer lane of the ring if you're going to imagine those roads. And so that's what I'm going to do now. And I'm using my slightly smaller brush tip so that I'm not filling in the whole way around, but just the outer edge. And then what I want to happen, I want there to be enough water on there so that the water pulls the color from the outer edge in and not my brush. So you can kind of see how it's traveling as I just put it down in this outer edge. I think I really like what we've got going on here. That's what I want. And you can see how it's kind of bleeding in at these points. If part of your circle is too dry and you're not getting this bleed, you can very carefully go back in. I'll try and do a little section like right here. So you don't want to actually touch the paint again, but you can get the paper wet again right up to that. So don't touch the paint with your brush, but you can let the water touch it. And that's only if it's not moving for you, like it dried before you got the paint down. And then we're just gonna let this kind of be pulled by the water, and you can tip. Okay, now I'm gonna come back in with my big brush again. I'm just gonna use clear water again. And what I want to do is I want to do another ring in further, and I don't want it to touch any of the water that I already have on the page. So I'm going to come in maybe 1/2 inch. I'm doing this kind of big, so just scale it according to whatever size you're making yours. And again, it doesn't have to perfectly mimic the outside shape. We just want a ring of water. And I'm just using a mixed media paper here, and it really absorbs the water much quicker than the Bible pages. So if you're doing this in your Bible, you won't probably have to keep laying down water like I am going over and over here. Okay, so now I'm going to get another color, and I'm going to do the same thing again, just on the outer edge of this second ring. I'm going to drop in my paint color. I guess I use that term a lot, drop in color. When I'm really not trying to paint a detail, I'm just trying to lay the color into the water and let the water move the paint. So hopefully that clarifies if you're like, what do you mean by drop in? You're just painting, you're not dropping anything. Well, I'm trying to let the water do the work, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And sometimes I'll just, kind of dab some paint in like this if I need more pigment in a certain area. And I'm not trying to paint specific details. Just let the water do the work. Okay, and we're going to do that a couple more times. Or you can just do 2 in the center. That's what I had the ladies do for time. You can do as many as you want going in, but you want to leave a dry white space between each one. And we'll come back and I'll explain after we get those rings done what we're going to do in there to give some color in there. And then you want to remember the principle that when you put wet paint next to damp paper, so wet but drier than where you're working, the paint will always bleed over to that drier but still damp surface from the wetter surface. And so that's why we don't really want things to touch at this point, because it'll just turn into one big mushy everything running together. So keep your lines separate. And what we're going to do with the center, you can do it solid or you can leave a white space, because remember I said that the centers or sometimes pockets in the edges will sort of get this crystal looking formation. And so I'm going to actually go ahead and leave a little bit of a white space in the middle of my center here. So maybe like over here, and it can just be any shape. Okay, and then once I have my center, the rest of the center painted, so I don't know if you can see, but I left a white space dry right there. You'll see it when I lay the paint in. And again, I'm not making my water go out. I don't want it to touch the next ring out at this point. And I'm going to fill this all in. Might actually go ahead and do a second color in here too. So kind of back, if you watched any of the other watercolor tutorials and we talked about things in nature are rarely one flat color. It's also true here, so you can just drop in a couple other colors and let the water move them around. So I'm not really giving much thought to this, just kind of randomly dropping it in. Now at this point, while this paint is still a little bit wet in the center, I'm actually going to just take some table salt and I'm going to sprinkle it on there to help it maybe get some of that crystal effect. And I have talked about salt technique before, and it's okay if a little bit gets on some of your damp areas here. It'll give that some texture too, but mainly we want it in the center to sort of give us our crystal thing. If you put it on immediately after you lay the paint down, like within seconds of putting the paint down, it tends to lift too much of the color, and if you wait until it dries, it won't lift any. So you sort of have to go with a happy medium. Get the paint down, give it a second, and then put a little bit of the salt on. If you use a larger grain salt, like a sea salt or something, it'll actually give you bigger areas where it lifts the color. And basically what's happening is the salt is absorbing the pigment, but the water is staying on the paper, and then when the water dries and you brush the salt away, some of that pigment will be swept away with the salt, and it gives you this crystal look. So that's just regular table salt on this one. And now I have to let it dry completely before I do the next steps. One, because I want to brush the salt off, and then two, because when I do my next layers, I don't want it mixing in with those other damp areas on the page. So I'll fast forward while it dries. Okay, I think we're dry, so I'm going to try brushing the salt off. And I'm just kind of very gently rubbing it with my finger to loosen it. Okay, so you can see how it kind of gave that pattern in here that looks a little crystal-y. And now that everything is dry, we can go back in and we can sort of decide what we want to do with the spaces in between. You can either fill it in with a little bit of a different color or a lighter color, or you can leave it white. It's really up to you and the look you want. And I highly recommend, if you just search some Google images or something of agates or geodes, cut stones, you'll find there's lots and lots of pictures that you can reference for color ideas and all of that. I don't want to take up too much of the white space with paint, but I think I am going to add a little bit more, just kind of dilute my color a little bit and just kind of fill in a little bit here. And I might just do it a little bit on the wispy side and leave some white spaces. Because I don't want it to blend in with that feathery edge that we got from letting the paint run. So the color I'm using right now is actually the same exact color as this outer ring, but I've just really diluted it with water, mixed it up on my palette, and I'm just using it with lots more water in it, so it's a less intense color. And I think I'll do that for the other rings as well. You could go back in that white space and you could do more rings. Maybe I'll show you that on this one. So I'm going to get my water again and lay down another ring in between here. Okay, and it's going to be thinner because I don't have as much space, so I'm going to use just the thinnest tip of my brush to lay it down. And then let the water do its work again. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing here that I did on this outer ring and just kind of swoop in a little more color and leave a little bit of white space as well. So to define my rings now, what I can do for the rings that are dry, I'm actually going to use my small tip brush again, and I'm just going to use the very tip of it. I'm going to go with the same color, but I want a lot of pigment, and I want it to be the most intense or dark value of the color. So very little water and just the tip of my paintbrush. I'm going to draw a really fine line right on the outer edge of where that ring starts, and then it fades in from there. And I'm gonna keep reloading my brush because I want it to be dark. Again, not very much water, lots of pigment. And I'm just going to do it on the outer edge. And then you can also do 2 lines. So I'll do that on the next one just to show you what that looks like. So a nice smooth continuous line, and then I'll do a second in the same color. Just move it in a little. Something about the mineralization and the way it lays down is what makes the rings, I would imagine, and so that's what we're going for here. And we want sort of this, some defined areas and some more abstract areas, because that's just how nature is, right? It's not a cartoon drawing, so to speak. It's got values and layers and different colors, and so that's what the look we're going for. If you find that you get done and it looks like you broke a jawbreaker in half, because you know those rainbow jawbreakers you used to get when you were a kid, and you suck on them and they turn one color than the other. If you ever cracked one of those in half with a hammer, you know that it sort of looks like a concentric rainbow of circles, and we don't really want that kind of a look because that's man-made. So I'm just doing the outer edges of those layers again, trying to keep it dark. You can always go over again if it's not dark enough for you. And remember that watercolor paint will always look lighter once it dries than it does when you first put it on. So these will not be quite as intense by the time it dries. Okay, so now we have those. So in the one that I did in my Bible, I actually used a Uniball Signo gel pen, a gold one, to add some little gold accents. There may be some gold flecks in it from that being in the mineral. I think it adds sort of a sparkle and a pretty piece to the image. So I'm going to just finish up by doing that, and then we'll talk about in the next video another sort of nature watercolor technique for another natural texture that you can do. I almost forgot, we need to put our crust on the outer layer, and that will be our last step. So I'm actually going to take black, and I'm going to add water to it to dilute it so that I get sort of a gray color. And I'm going to go right along the edge of my outer blue here, my outer layer, and as I go, I don't really want to go over the blue, so I'm going to kind of make this smooth, the first layer around kind of smooth, and just right along that edge. Because it's completely dry, it won't bleed over there. Just going over a second time to get it a little darker here. Okay, and then I'm gonna just kind of come along and make the outer edge a little bit less smooth, a little more bumpy. And I'm just gonna blend out that line so that it's not, so you don't see the line from the first track I laid down there. Paint. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do the salt technique again on this outer ring. And once that dries, I'll show you what that looks like. So again, I'm just gonna rub this off now that it's dry. So now you have that outer crust layer that generally stays on the rocks when they cut them. I imagine they chip it off sometimes, but so that's the outer crust layer, and it can be thinner or fatter. It's really up to you what you want the look, but it kind of gives it a finished, almost like that outer crust is its frame, so that's kind of cool.